Archaeologists have discovered a huge ancient city hidden underground in Mexico.
The bones of what looked to be a new human-like species. They're thought to be more than 3 million years old.
For a long time, the story of the Aztecs seemed simple. They arrived late, they built fast, and they vanished.
Everybody's heard about the Aztecs. Everybody's heard about the Maya.
But DNA just broke that story apart. Hidden inside ancient bones is a genetic signal that doesn't belong in the Americas at all. Not from Siberia, not from Asia, but from people on the opposite side of the planet. And once scientists saw it, they couldn't unsee it. Because if this DNA is real, then the Aztecs weren't just builders of an empire. They were inheritors of a world we never knew existed. So what exactly did the DNA reveal? For most of the last century, human migration into the Americas followed one clean idea, one entry point, one origin. Nearly 15,000 years ago, small groups crossed a frozen bridge of land from Siberia into Alaska. They moved slowly, generation by generation, north to south. This model explained almost everything: stone tools, languages, genetic similarities. It was neat, predictable, comforting. And then, in 2015, that timeline cracked. Scientists studying the DNA of indigenous groups deep in the Amazon expected familiar results, the same Siberian markers seen across the Americas. Instead, they found something else, a faint but unmistakable genetic signal that didn't match Asia, didn't match Siberia, didn't match anything nearby at all. The closest match came from the other side of the planet. Aboriginal Australians, Melanesians. At first, researchers assumed an error, contamination, bad data, a statistical glitch. But the signal stayed, test after test, sample after sample. And the dates made it worse. This lineage was ancient, over 15,000 years old, older than the Maya, older than agriculture, older than any known city in the Americas. This wasn't a late contact, it wasn't a recent journey. It meant at least one group reached the Americas by a route history never taught us. Even more disturbing, that DNA didn't spread evenly. It appeared in some places, vanished in others, as if entire populations once carried it and then disappeared. So if people arrived earlier than we thought, the next question becomes unavoidable. Who was already here when the Aztecs arrived? Until recently, history relied on what survived: stone, bones, stories written centuries after the fact. But DNA changed the rules. Instead of guessing who people were, scientists could now see it: inside teeth, inside bones, inside bloodlines that never made it into records. Two kinds of DNA became critical: mitochondrial DNA, passed from mothers to children, and Y-chromosomes, passed from fathers to sons. Together, they tell a quiet story: who stayed, who moved, and who vanished. When researchers began testing ancient remains across Mesoamerica, patterns emerged that history never noticed. Maternal lines stretched far across regions. The same female ancestry appeared hundreds of kilometers apart. This meant women were moving, or being moved. But the male story was different. Entire Y-chromosome lines stopped abruptly. Not slowly, not gradually. They ended. In places like Teotihuacan and early Maya cities, dominant male lineages disappeared around the same time cities collapsed, not from age, not from disease alone, from upheaval, violence, forced displacement, social breakdown. Historians once described these moments as political change. DNA described them as something much harsher. Men were removed from the population, women were absorbed into new societies. And over time, those surviving maternal lines blended into whatever power came next. This mattered more than anyone realized, because by the time the Aztecs arrived, the Valley of Mexico was not a stable world. It was a genetic patchwork built on survival, loss, and missing fathers. Which raises a disturbing possibility. What if the Aztecs didn't rise in a full world, but in one already emptied by collapse? By the time the Aztecs entered the Valley of Mexico, the land had already been shaped by thousands of years of movement. People didn't just arrive and stay. They met, they mixed, they replaced one another. DNA now shows that Mesoamerica was not a destination, it was a crossroads. Genetic studies reveal that lineages from ancient civilizations spread far beyond their city walls. Maternal DNA linked to early Maya populations appears deep in South America. Traces connected to central Mexican cultures show up far to the north. This means Mesoamerica didn't just absorb people, it sent them outward. Trade routes weren't just for goods, and were highways for humans. Families moved, craftsmen relocated, entire communities shifted with alliances and collapses. And when cities fell, people didn't vanish quietly, they scattered. This helps explain something that puzzled archaeologists for decades: why cultural styles, symbols, and rituals appeared suddenly in distant places, why similar burial practices showed up across wide regions. DNA confirms what artifacts only hinted at. The land the Aztecs stepped into was already layered, civilization on top of civilization, each leaving fragments behind. Some of those fragments survived as stories, others survived as genes, but not all survived equally. Male lineages thinned again and again with each collapse. Female lineages endured, weaving continuity through chaos. By the time the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico, the genetic balance had shifted. Many older paternal lines were gone. The social structures they once supported were broken, which meant power was waiting to be claimed, and someone was about to claim it. Because when a new group arrives in a fractured world, even a small advantage can change everything. When scientists mapped ancient DNA across Mesoamerica, one pattern stood out more than any other. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't rare, it was absence. Across multiple civilizations, the same thing kept happening. Male bloodlines vanished. In Olmec sites, early Maya cities, and Teotihuacan, dominant Y-chromosome lines ended abruptly, not over centuries, but in short windows of time. These breaks often matched moments of collapse. Cities burned, political systems failed, populations scattered. Historians once described these moments as transitions. DNA described them as removals. Men were killed in conflict, eliminated as rivals, or displaced so completely that their lineage never returned. Women, however, remained. Maternal DNA shows continuity where male lines do not. Women moved into new communities, married into rising powers, carried their ancestry forward quietly. This created a strange imbalance. The past survived through mothers, but fathers disappeared from the record. Entire family trees erased, leadership lines broken, social memory lost. By the time the Mexica, the people we call the Aztecs, arrived in the Valley of Mexico, this pattern had already reshaped the land. Many older male lines were gone. The societies they once led were weakened or fragmented, and that mattered. Because when a group with intact male lineages enters a world where others have lost theirs, power shifts fast. The Aztecs didn't just arrive late, they arrived at the perfect moment. And what they inherited next would give them an advantage no army alone could explain. When the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico, they weren't starting from scratch. They stepped into a world already fractured by centuries of collapse. Male lineages gone, societies weakened, yet the maternal lines endured. This gave the Aztecs a strange but decisive edge. Their own male ancestry remained intact, strong, unbroken. By marrying into the surviving maternal lines, they expanded quickly. They absorbed populations, they reshaped communities, and with every conquest, their power wasn't just political, it was biological. Genetic studies show this clearly. Maternal lines from older civilizations blended with Aztec male lines. The result? A population pattern that favored the newcomers. Their influence wasn't imposed, it was inherited.
and their impact reached far beyond the valley. DNA traces of Aztec expansion appear as far as northern Mexico and the Maya territories. Every conquest, every alliance left a mark in the genes of the people themselves. Language amplified their power. Nahuatl spread along trade routes. It wasn't just a tool for communication, it was culture, control, and cohesion embedded into everyday life. Regions connected by Nahuatl also show signs of genetic mixing. The language moved ideas, the genes moved with them. So the Aztecs didn't just conquer, they completed a puzzle left behind by vanished civilizations. They inherited a broken world and turned it into an empire. And yet, even with this advantage, traces remain of the civilizations they absorbed. What secrets do those traces still hide? Even as the Aztecs expanded their empire, the past lingered in subtle ways.
Not in ruins, not in temples, but in genes, words, and traditions. DNA shows fragments of older civilizations persisted within their population. Maternal lines carried stories older than the empire itself. Australasian genetic signals, traces from people long vanished, still surface deep in the population. Artifacts tell a similar story. Symbols, carvings, and religious motifs traveled across regions where Aztec armies never marched. They were carried by traders, travelers, and families moving along ancient networks. Nahuatl spread farther than most imagined, from central Mexico to distant valleys, coastal regions, even parts of what is now California. It became more than language. It became a bridge for ideas, for culture, for power. The Aztecs ruled not by erasing the past, but by absorbing it. By blending survivors into their system, they reinforced their dominance. Conquered populations were not just subdued, they became part of a living network, biologically and culturally. Yet the deeper the researchers looked, the stranger the picture became. Male lines from Olmec, Maya, and Teotihuacan vanished. Entire patriarchal networks disappeared, but women's lines endured. This imbalance shaped the Aztec Empire. It created an inheritance that was biological as well as political, a hidden advantage embedded in the DNA of the people they ruled. And still, questions remain. Who were the men that disappeared? What knowledge, traditions, or power died with them? And what did the Aztecs truly inherit from these vanished civilizations? The Aztecs didn't just build an empire. They inherited a world already shaped by migrations, collapses, and vanished lineages. Every conquest, every alliance, every trade route carried fragments of civilizations long gone. DNA reveals what history books could not. A continent in motion, male lines erased, female lines preserved, cultures layered one upon another. The Aztecs were the inheritors, not the originators, not even the final chapter, but the group that stepped into a broken world and turned it into one of the most complex societies in the Americas. And yet, the most mysterious traces remain. The Australasian signals deep in the Amazon, the vanished fathers of Mesoamerica, the knowledge and influence that disappeared with them. History is not just in ruins, it is written in DNA. It whispers through lineages, through trade routes, through languages like Nahuatl that spanned hundreds of miles. We can see the pattern, we can trace the rise and fall, we can read the inheritance, but some questions resist answers. What truly caused these male lineages to vanish? Was it violence, disease, social upheaval, or something else entirely? And what secrets might the DNA of future discoveries still reveal? The story of the Aztecs is not just the story of an empire. It is the story of a continent, of migrations, of survival, and of mysteries waiting, quietly, to be uncovered. And that leaves us asking, what else has been hidden all along in plain sight?